On the island of Seili, water has been both a separating and connecting element for people and other parts of nature, shaping the culture and framing the biodiversity on the island. This session consists of a short video trailer presenting the Seili Island and the themes of the project, panel discussions and poetry performance. This session brings together biologists, archaeologists, historians, archaeobotanists and artists. And now I will introduce the presenters of this workshop. Ilari S. Sääksjärvi is a professor of biodiversity research and director of the Biodiversity Unit at the University of Turku. His background is in tropical biodiversity research, and he has, for example, discovered hundreds and named about 200 new animal species from Amazonia. He has also given talks about biodiversity in schools and kindergartens. In addition to his extensive scientific publication record, he has written several non-fiction books on biodiversity and rainforest for the general public. PhD Mia Rönkä is adjunct professor in environmental ecology and biodiversity unit at the University of Turku. Biologist by training, Rönkä is a researcher, science journalist, writer, poet, and recreational photographer, interested in particular in the relationship and interaction between man and other parts of nature. Mia Lempiäinen Avci holds a PhD in archaeobotany. She defended her thesis at the Biodiversity Unit at the University of Turku 2019. Her research interests include cultivation history, plant genetics, and archaeology. Currently, she is engaged in medieval wood species analysis as an Academy of Finland project researcher into carving out transformations wood use in northeastern Europe, Anno Domini 1000 to 1600 AD project. She's also part of the Archaeological Natural Scientific Research Project Seili, the Island of Life, where she studies the history of economic and medical plants as well as changes in environment on the Seili Island. PhD cultural historian Heta Lähdesmäki defended her thesis on human-wolf relations in January 2020. Lähdesmäki is interested in environmental history, human-animal studies, critical plant studies, and post-humanism. In the research project Seili, the Island of Life, Lähdesmäki studies the environmental history of the island by looking into archived materials as well as by gathering oral history. So now I have presented all the presentators to you, and I welcome you on the stage. It is yours now.
Kun lähdetään kaivamaan maaperää ja tutkitaan semmoisia mikroskooppisia hiukkasia ja eliöitä, niin siinä on aina semmoinen yllätysmomentti, että mitä sieltä saattaakaan löytää. Idea tähän Elämänsaari-hankkeeseen lähti siitä, kun me todettiin Turun yliopiston biodiversiteettiyksikössä, että meillä on laajaa asiantuntemusta arkeobiologisiin selvityksiin. Eli me kyetään tunnistamaan monenlaisia muinaisia eliöjäänteitä, kuten siitepölyhiukkasia, kasvien siemeniä, fytoliitteja tai hyönteisten osasia. Luonnon monimuotoisuus ja ihminen osana sitä on kiinnostunut meitä jo pitkään, ja nyt on hienoa päästä lisäämään siihen historiallinen aspekti. Seilin saari on hyvin herkullinen tutkimuskohde siinä mielessä, että aika hyvin on dokumentoitu Seilin historia. Tiedetään, minkä tyyppisiä ihmisyhteisöjä täällä on minäkin vuosisatana elänyt.
Vanhin maininta Seilisaaresta on 1500-luvulta, että 1540 vuoden maakirjassa mainitaan Seili, se on tämmöinen rekisteri verovelvollisuuksista, niin siellä on maininta kylästä.
Erityisesti tämän lepraparantolan kannalta nämä 1600-luvun vaiheet ovat hyvin mielenkiintoisia ja arkeologisin metodein pystytään tutkimaan näiden leprasairaiden arkea täällä eristyksissä muusta maailmasta.
Luonnontieteellisten tutkimusmenetelmien avulla saadaan arkeologisesta kohteesta semmoista tietoa, mitä välttämättä siinä kaivaustilanteessa ei pystytä näkemään. Et juurikin nämä tämmöiset mikroskooppiset kasvilöydöt, samoin kuin pienet vaikka eläinten luut. Eli silloin saadaan laajemmin tietoa siitä ihmisen elämästä.
Seilistä voidaan siitepölytutkimuksen avulla saada selville, että miten kasvillisuus on muuttunut Seilin saarella vuosisatojen kuluessa. Miten ihmisen toiminta on siellä näkynyt.
Fytoliitit ovat kasviin muodostuneita mikrofossiileja. Fytoliitit, kun ne noudattaa sitä kasvin rakennetta, niin siellä juuristossa, varressa kuin lehdissäkin, tuottavat tiettyä taksonomista tietoa, jota voidaan käyttää siitä, että kun tunnistetaan tietyn kasvisolukon vaikutus siihen fytoliitin muotoon, niin se tuottaa tietynmallisia fytoliitteja, ja kun ne tunnetaan, niin voidaan sitten myöhemmin tunnistaa jopa maaperän näytteistä, johon kasvi kuollessaan luovuttaa tämän piivarastonsa ja nämä mikrofossiilinsa, niin voidaan tunnistaa sen entisen kasvin laji, suku tai heimo.
Heti kun saareen tulee, saaren keskiosassa, niin näkyy se, että liikutaan perinneympäristöissä. Liikutaan ympäristöissä, jossa luonnon monimuotoisuus ja ihminen on luontevalla tavalla ollut vuorovaikutus keskenään pitkän aikaa. Ja ne on oikeastaan tämän saaren arvokkaimpia alueita, jos ajatellaan vaikka perinneympäristöön sitoutuneita kasvilajeja tai sitten vaikka pölyttäjähyönteisiä. Mun mielestä luonnon monimuotoisuuden säilyttämisessä yksi tärkeimpiä asioita on tiedon levittäminen. Luonnon monimuotoisuutta käsittelevässä keskustelussa ehkä ongelmana on pitkään ollut se, että se keskustelu on aika pitkälti puuttunut. Seili tarjoaa omalla osallaan hyvät mahdollisuudet tiedon levittämiseen.
Se, että voidaan rakentaa tarkempi kuva siitä, miten ihminen ja muu ympäristö on ollut vuorovaikutuksessa eri vuosisatoina ja miten ehkä vaikuttanut toinen toisiinsa, niin se varmaan auttaa meitä nykyihmistäkin luomaan paremman kuvan, kuinka tärkeä luonto on ja kuinka tärkeää on se, että ihminen ja muu luonto elää yhteisymmärryksessä.
Okay, good afternoon everybody. And before starting my presentation, I would like to thank Aboagora for this opportunity to keep this workshop today in this event. Seili Island of Life research team is a very interesting place to work with. We have so many backgrounds represented in our team that it's all the days are different. And as you heard already in the introduction part of the workshop, we have archaeologists, historians, biologists, biodiversity researchers, artists, etc. working in the project. And I think that makes our research team quite special. The aim of our research is to understand better the interactions between man and biodiversity. And we are studying that in one island called Seili, which is one of the most beautiful islands in Finland. Our project is funded by the Kone Foundation. So we all have different backgrounds, and my background is also somewhere else than in Seili. My background is in tropical biology and tropical biodiversity research, and I have been working with Amazonian biodiversity already since 1998. So about 20 years I have been studying the Amazonian evolution of Amazonian biodiversity. I have spent about 3 years working in the field in different parts of Amazonia. And in a way, Amazonia is a land of water also. It is a huge sea of forests, and water is a very important element all over the Amazonia. The aim of my research team, my own research team, besides of this Seili team, is to discover new animal species. And in Amazonia, if you think there is a huge amount of species, we estimate that there may be millions of species living in Amazonia. In every expedition we find quite cool new animal species. Before going to the island of Seili, I have to show you some images of the cool animal species that we have found during the last few years. One of my favorites is Umanella kiekometti. As you can see, not all the new species that one can find are small-sized species. This species is, for example, about 10 centimeters long, so it's a huge insect. It's a shiny blue species, very beautiful species. And then I just continue a little bit more with my animals before going to the island. These are also some of the new species that we have described for science during this year, actually. Already this year, we have named and discovered about 40 new animal species in the University of Turku, and these are just some examples. One of my favorites is Lauredia phoenixi spider. Phoenixi, the specific name Phoenixi, refers to Joaquin Phoenix, who is the principal actor of the Joker movie. As you can see, the species resembles the Joker, the facial mask of the Joker. And then on the right side of the slide, you can see some new wasp species that we have found from Amazonia, and they are beautiful, quite large-sized species, but they are also extremely interesting biologically. They actually can manipulate the behavior of other species chemically. So they are extremely interesting new species. I give a lot of talks about biodiversity and lectures about biodiversity, and if we think about biodiversity, we still live in a planet that is quite badly known. Actually, we estimate that about 80% of the species that live on Earth are still undiscovered. So that means that annually we are describing huge amounts of new species, and we know very little about biodiversity in general. We have just a hint of idea of the whole biodiversity that lives on our planet. And that's a shame, because at the same time, we are losing species at an accelerating pace. According to the recent estimates, we may be losing 1 million species during the next 2 or 3 decades. So our human impact on nature is so severe at the moment that other species are dying quite rapidly, on rapid pace all over the world. And the situation is most critical in the tropics, where the species diversity is also highest, but it's also severe here in Finland, for example. And in Finland also, every year we have more and more threatened species, and species are in risk of going extinct in Finland also. But when we talk about biodiversity crisis and what is happening to the biodiversity all over the world and also in Finland, it's good to know that there is always hope. We should not stop fighting for biodiversity. We should find new solutions to protect and conserve biodiversity. And it's actually quite nice to know that we already have most of the tools that can be used to save biodiversity, that can be used to slow down the current biodiversity crisis. We have to talk more about biodiversity crisis. You know that everybody talks about climate change. Climate change has become a hot topic in academia and society, but at the same time we have this other ecological crisis, which is called biodiversity crisis. And it may be even more severe than climate change. So we should focus also on biodiversity crisis, and that is something that we are doing in the island of Seili. In our opinion, in our research team, we think that we can find at least part of the solutions to slow down the biodiversity crisis by looking back, by looking to the history. And that's the main reason why we are working in the island of Seili. The island of Seili, I think that most of you have already visited the island of Seili, maybe during the last weekend when you had a pre-symposium there or earlier. But it's one of the most beautiful islands in the Archaeobiology Sea. It's located in southwestern Finland, quite close to Turku actually, and it's surrounded by hundreds or actually by thousands of other islands, and it's surrounded by a very specific sea called the Archaeobiology Sea, which is threatened also, which is changing quite rapidly at the moment. And the island of Seili is a wonderful place to work with, because it's a quite large island, and it's actually, in my opinion, it's the Amazonia of Finland. Because biodiversity peaks in southern Finland, biodiversity peaks in the islands of the Archaeobiology Sea. So in the island of Seili, like in other large islands also, you can find huge amounts of species in comparison with many habitats that are present here in the continent. So it's full of species, and it's full of really interesting habitats and ecosystems. And that's also one of the reasons why we are working there. And what makes Seili also interesting is the history of the island. You may know that about 400 years ago, a leprosis hospital was established to the island of Seili, and then about 300 years ago, a mental asylum or mental hospital was established to the island of Seili. And the mental hospital was actually working in the island until the year 1962, and then the University of Turku came to the island in 1964. So we also have a quite long history in the island. Because of that leprosis and mental asylum history, the island of Seili is many times called or described as the island of death. But in our opinion, we should talk about island of life, because Seili is actually full of life, and death is always interesting, and it fascinates people, but we should always remember that it's especially the island of life. It's one of the most diverse places in Finland, and also our species has been present quite a long time, and we have interacted with other biodiversity in the island for a very long period of time. Nowadays, the Seili of Island hosts an archipelago research institute or research station, which belongs to the Biodiversity Unit. And the staff and students of the Archaeological Sea Research Station, they conduct long-term studies on archipelago sea. So they are collecting all the time new data about the archipelago sea. They are constantly monitoring the status of the archipelago sea. So they are doing very important kind of marine biological work in the island of Seili. But besides of that marine biological research that our staff is conducting in the island, it's important to remember that we have also studied for a long time the terrestrial biodiversity in the island. Here in this aerial image, you can see part of the study plots that we have used in the island during the past 20 years or so. So you can see that there is a huge amount of study plots where we have inventoried the plants and, for example, insects of the island and conducted long-term monitoring, but also, for example, basic species inventories. So little by little, we have accumulated a quite large amount of biodiversity data that can be used to understand, for example, the biodiversity crisis and interactions between man and nature in a better way. One beautiful example of these studies is Melanburum arvensis, which is a common cowweed. It's one of the symbol species of the island of Seili. It's one of the most uncommon species living in the island. This is a very beautiful, quite large-sized species that is quite rare in other parts of Finland. And actually the main part of the Finnish population of Melanburum lives in the island of Seili. And you may have heard that the Biodiversity Unit we have also developed science tourism in the island. So there are more and more visitors coming to the island annually. And at the moment there are about 20,000 or 25,000 people visiting the island every year. And their impact to the biodiversity of the island has to be monitored more carefully nowadays. And Melanburum arvensis is one of the species that we are using for that monitoring. So every year we are counting all the specimens of Melanburum and checking if the increasing amount of visitors have an impact to the biodiversity, to the very fragile biodiversity of the island. Besides of plants, we have also studied insects, for example, in the island. During the last couple of decades, we have used a number of different kind of insect traps, and we are using them every year. There is one example, a tent-like structure, which is called Malaise Trap. It's one of the most efficient insect traps ever built. It actually collects about 2,000, 3,000 insects every day, and by using that information, we can build a good image of the current biodiversity present in the island. And there you can see also some of my favorites. Those are Parasitoid Wasps, and as you can see on the right side of the image, that species is actually smiling for you. So that's one of the reasons why I'm working with insects, because they look cute and they actually smile for you when you study them. I actually, in my office, I discuss with these guys. So they are quite beautiful species. And also, another example of the studies that we have conducted in the island of Seili is the tick project. Ticks are increasing in abundance. Climate is changing all the time, and so the abundance of ticks is increasing in Finland, and so is the abundance of tick-borne pathogens. So it's a very important species. Ixodes ricinus is a very important species for our health also. And Seili has been one of the centers of Finnish tick research. We actually started the tick research in the island of Seili already in 1986, but especially during the last 10 years we have been putting a lot of effort to the tick research. So we have collected thousands of ticks from the island of Seili, and we have also identified the pathogens that they are carrying, all the bacteria and viruses that they are carrying and that are potentially dangerous for us. In those studies, this is one of my favorite species that we have found from the island. In those studies we have also found this one. Ixodes huukkeri is a tiny little, quite cute parasitoid wasp species. It's about 1 millimeter long, so it's you can barely see it with bare eyes. You have to use microscopes or other methodologies to see it better. But it's a very beautiful little species, and it's biologically quite interesting because it actually kills ticks. And the island of Seili is the second place in Finland that we have found this species. It was found for the first time in the 1950s from Lohja, which is quite close to Helsinki in southern Finland. One female was found in the 1950s, and then Ixodes huukkeri disappeared from Finland. And a couple of years ago we found it again from the island of Seili. And this is especially interesting because it has potential in the biological control of ticks, because this species attacks ticks. The female lays eggs inside the young tick specimens, and the hatching larvae, they actually eat the tick specimen alive before the reproduction of the ticks. So it stops the reproduction of the ticks. So it's a quite nice species, and I really love it. It's a beautiful species. In this project, in Seili Island of Life project, we can also utilize a huge amount of other data that we are collecting constantly in the Archipelago Sea region. So we are not working only in the island of Seili, but we have also researchers working in other islands. And here, for example, you can see some of our entomologists this year who have been working in different islands and collecting and monitoring the insect life in different islands of the archipelago sea. And besides of pure science, we are also utilizing Seili, the island of Seili, as a basis for field courses. So every year, tens of biology students and other, for example, geography students are visiting the island of Seili, and they have their field courses in the island. And at the same time, they are also producing more data about the current biodiversity patterns of the island. So in their works, in their practices, they are collecting using different kind of methodologies to collect data on biodiversity, and that data is also something that we can use when we study the biodiversity of the island in the Seili Island of Life project. So Seili offers a good basis for a research team like Island of Life. Our main aim is to understand better the interaction between man and other nature. And in Seili, we have a huge amount of biological information about the island that we can compare the present-day biodiversity data that we can compare to the data that, for example, Mia is collecting in the archaeobiological excavations. And that is something that makes Seili quite a special place, and it's good to work there. I hope that you all can visit the island of Seili in the future and see that it's one of the most beautiful islands that we have in Finland. So now we will continue with the archaeobiological part of the workshop, but if you have any questions now, no. Then I say thank you. Unfortunately, I have to leave to another meeting right away, but Mia and Heta will be with you the whole afternoon and will tell you something more about our project. So, thank you all.
Water is essential for development of cultures. Our whole civilization is built on the use of water. Now you can't see the old text, but it says Seili, the island of life. In this talk, my aim is to present what importance in the past water had to the inhabitants of the Seili island, how the culture, the way of life, and the livelihoods have been and how they have been changed on the island over the millennia. As an archaeologist, I don't study contemporary time, but I study the past time, 10,000s of years back until the 18th century, mostly. So as Ilari has said, Biodiversity Unit at the University of Turku has an ongoing project at Seili, where we used archaeological and natural scientific studies in order to reveal how people lived and how the environment looked in the past. So, the earliest signs of human activity on the island are, based on our knowledge now, from the Bronze or Iron Age. And this cairn on the photo is made of big stones that are visible today. They are approximately 3,000 years old. And these cairns were used for burials, or they could have been also landmarks. These are not well studied in Seili, so therefore we don't know the exact date. Cairns are located high on top of a cliff, hidden in the forest today, but in the past they used to be very visible in the landscape, and they were also very visible from the sea. Next visible sign of the past activities on the island are so-called cup marks or capstones, which date about 1,000 years ago, a late Iron Age, so to say. And these cups are mostly associated with rituals that ensured good luck or harvest. As you can see from the photo, even today people put money in the cups, maybe to ensure well-being in the future as well. So these cairns and these cupstones were the visible memories of the island's past. Next step is that we need archaeologists to look what is hidden into the soils, because there is more visible structures telling us about the past. So then archaeologists and historians and biologists step into the picture, and we arrived to the island to study its history with multiple different methods. So we had archaeological excavations, and we wanted to find out, as been said before, how people lived on the island and what, for example, they ate, what they were cultivating, what kind of medicinal plants they used, how they changed the landscape. They cut down the trees, for example, and what their daily life was about, and how the environment has looked. And during the excavations, we collected soil samples, which will be analyzed in the laboratory. These analyses are not done yet, so I can't really tell about those, but I will tell you something about the archaeological finds, what we did, and how the archaeology looked. Based on the excavations, we know that the inhabitants of the island in 16th to 18th century had connections overseas, as we found tobacco pipes which originate from the Netherlands. We found pieces of finely painted dishes originating from Europe, but we also found some locally made red clay ceramics. So this all tells us that Seili Island inhabitants on the island had international contacts overseas based on these foreign finds. But also they produced something on the island as well. And one of the most exciting finds from archaeological point of view, especially, was this needle on the picture that was made of bone. This kind of bones have been an essential item in everyday basis, as these kind of needles were used to sew sails, and they were also used to weave nets and so on. Based on archaeological excavations, we also know that, for example, next to the church on Seili, that is now, it's built on 1733, there was a small house. Maybe you can see there's where is our excavation field, in front of the church. We found a small house that had a floor made of wooden planks, and then we found tiles. That maybe means that there was either a fireplace in the house made of these tiles, or front of the fireplace there has been like a tiles on the floor securing the house from the fire. Unfortunately, the house has burnt down based on our studies because the wooden planks were burned and charred. During the excavations, we took samples, and we hope to find what, for example, in this special house was eaten, if we find animal bones that can tell about the domestic animals, or about the animals that had been hunted, seals, fish, birds, for example, deer, whatever there has been near the island. But also we might find some indications of international contacts, like some exotic fruits, for example, and then of course some remains of locally cultivated cereals, maybe barley or rye. But these studies are on process at the moment. And based on natural scientific analyses, we hopefully will reveal with the pollen analysis and phytolith analysis, and as I mentioned earlier, this analysis of grain remains, for example, we hope to find out how the environment has changed, how the vegetation has looked 500 years ago and what was cultivated. These are interesting things that tell us a nice story about the past lifestyles on Seili Island. And based on these, we would like to know how the landscape and biodiversity has changed. We have taken samples for pollen, for phytoliths, and for plant remains, and for insects, and then bone samples, at least. I can't remember anything else. And these, when we put these results together, we hope to get a nice picture of the past life in Seili. Yeah, this picture actually belonged to this, that we hope to get to know how the environment has and the vegetation has changed in the past. My note to take home is that Seili has a diverse history. Water has affected the past a lot. Without water, culture wouldn't have developed there. And without water, we wouldn't have all these stories we have from the island now. Water creates life, and Seili is an island of life. Thank you. Now there's, I guess, a few minutes for questions if you have anything, and if you have any comments or anything, or then on the coffee break. Yes, we want to have questions now, or at the end also, but if you have something on your mind now, we have a few moments. Jon?
Yes, hi, I'm Jon Björkman, and I was part of the pre-symposium group that just came back from Seili yesterday, and we had a wonderful time, and I was very excited to hear about these new archaeological findings, the cup-marked stones, and a stone setting on top of the hill that looked like a ship, what do you call it, a stone ship almost. And these findings are about 10 years old. I mean, found about 10 years old. They're about much older than that, of course. But has there been any discussion as to their significance? Because cup-marked stones on an island like that, I think it changes our perception of how we have conceived the settlement of the archipelago.
No, there hasn't been, I guess, that much discussions. Those cup marks were found 10 years ago or something, but usually cup marks are situated near Iron Age sites where people have lived on Iron Age, but in Seili we haven't found any indications of Iron Age settlements. Last summer, when archaeologist Janne Rantanen was there, he went through the area quite a lot, and he had a metal detector as well. He meant inventory quite a lot, but we couldn't find anything. So that requires more intensive research and inventory on the island in order to find an Iron Age settlement. But this is the only memory from Iron Age. But then again, we have to remember that we are not sure that these cupstones are from Iron Age. They can be also early medieval, for example, but not probably later than that. That's the general assumption in archaeology, I think.
Even early medieval would be very exciting and really increase the importance of Seili even further. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so as we already know, Seili has a rich history. The cultural, social, and medical history of the island has been studied a lot, but people's relationship with nature and the coexistence with other life forms on the island in the past has remained almost unexplored. In this project, we fill this void. And as a historian in the project, I study first of all the entanglements and co-living between humans and other life forms on the island. Secondly, the changing attitudes and ideas humans had concerning other animals, plants, and nature in general. And lastly, try to imagine and get a glimpse of what life was like for other animals and plants on the island. And to get an idea of what my job has been, one of my jobs was and still is to look up what species are mentioned in the sources and make lists for other researchers on our team to use as a reference for what they could expect to find from the soil collected last year on the excavations. In my research, I look into archived sources, such as letters, inventories, reports, maps, photographs, that exist from the 16th century onward. And beside this material, I use oral history, the memories and stories of people who have lived and worked on the island. And also, we have the opportunity to look into private photographs people have. And these oral history material is collected during our research project. And what I intend to do in this project is to study the cultural and environmental history of the island with a more than human approach. Historian Emily O'Gorman has written that humans and their pasts have always been more than human, co-created with many other organisms and forces. Also, for instance, historian Sandra Swart has stated that human history has always been multi-species. This is one of the things our project wants to highlight. In the Middle Ages, the island was owned by the Swedish crown, and it was, according to the present-day knowledge, permanently inhabited, at least from the 16th century onward, by peasants tending the land. And as Mia mentioned before this, the island might have been temporarily inhabited by fishermen and seal hunters. In the 17th and 18th century, the island was home to a leper hospital. And this actually, the hospital was founded on Seili because Seili is an island. The Swedish king wanted to move in 1619 a leper hospital that existed in the city of Turku. The king wanted to move this hospital from the city to a remote and excluded island in order to prevent leprosy from spreading. A committee named by the king chose Seili as the place. Besides leper patients, from late 17th century onward, there were also mental patients living on the island on a mental asylum, and quite early on, also people who couldn't take care of themselves, such as poor people, cripples, and blind people were brought to the island. Also on the island there lived the preacher, the hospital director with their families, and many servants. By the end of the 18th century, less and less leper patients came to the island, and at the same time more and more mentally afflicted patients were brought to the mental hospital. In 1889, the demography on the island changed when the hospital became a place for chronically ill women. And the women diagnosed mentally ill were treated in Seili until 1962, when the hospital was closed. During the 19th and 20th century, Seili was not only inhabited by the mental hospital patients, it was in a way a lively village where hospital workers lived with their families. And during some time, there was even a school for the village children. A new era began in 1964 when Turku University's Archaeological Research Institute was founded on the island. And another new era, in a way, began in 2017 when a tourism entrepreneur started their business on the island. And since then, the number of tourists visiting and staying on the island has grown. So all these groups of people I just mentioned, they have lived on the island, co-living with the environment and with other life forms. What do we know about domestic animals? The archived sources tell that at least since the 16th century there have been farmed animals living on the island, and due to the leper hospital the number of farmed animals increased. Most of them lived on a farm, later called Fogdeby, that took care of the hospital's food management until the end in the early 1960s. Also, for instance, the leper hospital's director had some cattle, and in the 19th and 20th century, the mental hospital workers had some animals themselves. Throughout centuries, there have been horses, cows, oxen, bulls, sheep, bucks, goats, chicken, and also dogs and cats living on the island. Farmed animals were essential to people on many levels. Some were food, some working animals, and some were companion animals. One can say that animal husbandry enabled people to live on the island. Still, the leper hospital nor the mental hospital were not totally self-sufficient. Food products were brought to the island from outside, and other products also, as Mia mentioned. What about wild animals? It's more difficult to find information about the relationship wild animals and humans had on my sources, but we still know that people were connected to wild animals, for instance, through fishing, hunting, and fowling, and especially fishing has been really important on the island. And according to archived sources, both in the leper hospital and in the mental hospital, people ate a lot of fish, such as Baltic herrings. The Swedish name of the island, Seili, tells about the relationship between humans and seals. The name probably originates from the word in the local Nauvoo dialect for seal, säl, and the word for island, ö, Sälö, meaning the island of seals. It was probably common to see seals in the shores of Seili in the old days, but during the 20th century, seal sightings grew rarer. And we also know that some wild animals were not appreciated, such as house mice. They were viewed as pests, and also there is a written source there is a sowing and farming diary from 1946 that mentions that an insect, that silver Y, which is a moth species, that this silver Y maggots, they destroyed some of the harvest. So we have some information, and oral history is really important when trying to gather information on wild animals. Plants, it's quite or relatively easy to find information about cultivated plants from the sources. In Seili, people have, according to the written sources, they have grown rye, barley, oats and wheat, many root vegetables, and all kinds of vegetables, and also hay for animals, and tobacco and hop. But then wild plants, you can't really find a lot of information on the archived sources about wild plants, and here is where oral history comes really useful. For instance, one of my interviewees told that their mother collected nettles and used them as a source of food in the 1940s when they lived on the island. And then one group of non-humans that I'm really interested is trees, or are trees. Seili is often talked of as a treeless or nearly treeless island, and this idea partly originates from Johan Knutsson's illustration in Finland framställt i teckningar by Zacharias Topelius. And this picture shows a nearly treeless view to the hospital buildings. And despite this idea, trees have grown on the island, and according to a land utilization map from 1911, for instance, spruce, pine, birch, as well as alder, juniper, and hazel grew on the island at that time. People also grew apple, cherry, and plum trees in their gardens. And trees were really vital for people. People cut down trees to get firewood and timber. And the need for firewood was so significant that they were also brought from the mainland and from other places besides the Seili Island. Also, timber for bigger building projects was acquired elsewhere. So trees were needed, but they were also admired. In a book about Nauvoo area, the history and nature about this area, published in 1915, Seili is told to be known for its beautiful nature and uncommonly rich and varying flora. And freely growing broad-leaved trees are specially mentioned on the book. And here you can see from old photographs that in a way, what is the composition of trees and, for instance, cultivated land. And this is a picture from, in a way, today's situation on the island. And one can say that today there are more trees on the island than there has been for a long time. But still, that doesn't mean that Seili has been totally treeless. And as Mia mentioned, Seili, we have this idea that Seili was a totally isolated place, but it's not the whole truth. Seili was located by a busy route from Turku to Stockholm, and it was relatively easy to get to the island from outside. And for instance, during the 19th century, mental hospital patients could be visited by their close relatives, and even prying Turku citizens were able to visit the island. Some written sources mention people living in Turku or tourists in general visiting the island, wanting to see mentally shipwrecked inmates and even behaving in a bad manner. Some people who lived on the island were able to leave Seili. In the 19th century, the hospital treasurer had a boat with which he made trips to Turku and back to run errands. And later, in the 20th century, there was a motorboat which was used to fetch the doctor from Naua to visit the hospital. And also, according to a logbook, also vets and butchers visited the island with this motorboat. And one interviewee the same interviewee actually, who lived on the island in the 1940s as a young boy, told that the 6-kilometer journey from the island to Naua, to the city of Naua, took 1 hour by a rowing boat. And during winter, this trip could be made by walking on the ice if the conditions were right. And of course, the leper hospital and mental hospital patients did not have as much freedom as the villagers. But still, the sea did not only isolate Seili, it was also a way to travel. Okay, so thank you. And if you have some questions about the historical research, then you can ask now or later during coffee break.
Good. Great, thanks. Thanks so much. It's really fascinating. And as we said, we've been at Seili for the pre-symposium as well, and we got to experience both a little bit of the archaeology, the archipelago, and as well the history. I see we don't have any questions from the audiences online, or actually here we have one. From Otto Latva, have you found any historical sources about ticks?
Well, there are probably the best source to collect information on ticks is oral history. And also, as Ilari mentioned, the research material, the researchers on the Research Institute, that all this kind of data they have collected. But I haven't found any written documents on the archive. There's so little about wild animals, so no mention of ticks. So, but I will continue to look, and I put my hope in oral history.
Yeah, good, thanks. I also, there's a question over there as well.
Thank you. My name is Ruth Ilman, and it was fascinating to follow this discussion. I always thought that själe was from the Swedish word for shale, soul. That's what you would think, but this was very interesting to hear. Now, we've heard presentations from all of you belong to the same research team, Island of Life, from very different disciplinary approaches. So, how do you benefit from each other's work, and what can you bring out when you bring together your historical views and the biologist and the archaeologist? What new comes out of this, and how can you discuss with each other in a way that will build new research? It's very interesting, and I think it's very promising for the future to see.
Yeah, thank you. That was a really good question. If Mia wants to answer also, but I think this is like one of the really best things about our project, that it's really multidisciplinary. And as a historian, I can say that I benefit greatly from archaeologists and from...
No, we benefit from you.
We benefit, who benefits the most? We have like a contest. But it's especially about, as I said, about the wild animals and wild plants. There's not enough information written down, so we need to use that. And also, when it comes to animals, it would be stupid not to look into the bones or the material sources that archaeologists have looked for years. Yeah.
And then again, we don't find everything from when we excavate, so there's lots of gaps. So then, for example, it's nice to have this archive material that Heta showed that there's been cultivated, for example, hops and these kind of things what I then expect to find from my samples. And that also gives us some assumptions what to expect somehow. And if we don't find them on our samples, then we can think that why we don't find them. Of course, our material, organic material, can also be destroyed during the history, but then it's interesting also what quantities we find, because my experience is that archaeological finds and archive material don't usually match very well for research or another. So it's interesting to, at the end, combine all the data that we have, and then again, we have, of course, many new questions. We might have more gaps than we have now.
Okay, now we have to go on with our program, so more questions on the coffee break. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mia Rönkä, and the poems of the poem performance Dialogues of Silence have been inspired by water, the sea, shores, coastlines, islands, and also by Arctic environments, ice, snow, hail. Some of the poems have been published in my poem collection, Underground Birds, Maanalaiset linnut, and some are newer and yet unpublished. And I write in Finnish, so I have translated the texts to English for you. On the rocky shores, I excavate a sound among bird bones, a message. Fingers jingle, knees, hips. The sound is that of a stone, of a bone. Rhythm, recognizable. I grow teeth, wings, ascend in scream. Green reflects on black. The sea is a constant and an approximation, repeatedly stepped on. On the waves, a ball floats, thrown by a careless child. I'm washing your shore again, tied to the island where you are missing. The velvet slush of jellyfish rustling against beached rocks, cold water running in the pipes, our voices set in steel, traces of you drifting on paper, a deviation in a seagull's flight, a horn owl's glance meeting long-time travelers. Last week, vast areas of sea were cleared by strong winds, blown together with stony edges trembling in sludge. We sink beneath steel, unable to escape. The island is drowning. Small unholy men wading in blood. The sea rumbles, twitches, warning signs surfacing. The soil absorbs water. The sea dilutes, abates. The island subsides. How light to depart and heavy to return. Salt burning in veins. Water on retina. In semicircular canals, the wave of the algae. The houses turn their back to the wind. In the yard, a swing buried in snow. People await the summer. It's an ephemeral disturbance. I try to find reasons to be angry at you. Before the snowing stops, before the roads are opened, you cannot be reached. The mountain spits another shower of hail. The landscape is already black and white. Nothing needs to be removed. The horizon disappears. The farther mountains, the nearer, the shore, the road is white. The island transforms, shrugs its shoulders. Tracks are covered in snow. Cold faces cold. Houses disappear, emerge, disappear. Hazard signals of the landscape. Snow lingers on the road, seduces. Warmth adheres to the windows. Movement of the chest, seconds, meters per second. We attach to what we can reach. A raven plows a rough path in the wind. The car disappears in snow. Finally, it gets easier to be silent. Close the eyes. Rather look at black than white. Thank you. And now you as the audience will have the last word or the last words, so to say. When you came in here today, many of you gave me a word, something that came into your mind when thinking about the island of Seili. And thank you for your words. Can I focus this a bit more? Somehow, does anyone know? Yes, I found, thank you. Thank you. And now for the closing remarks and maybe taking some more questions about the project and our work, I leave the floor to Heta.
Okay, thank you. And our project shows how researchers from different backgrounds can study the same topic or same subject and try to answer the same questions, but use different approaches, can work together. And in this project, we try to understand the relationship between humans and the rest of the nature. And I would like to, besides us that have talked today and performed today, there are many other researchers on our project. So I would like to thank them, of course, for doing their research. And as we talked with Mia Lempiainen just a moment ago, this is still a really good and important lesson in a way, how to do science in unison with different kind of approaches and with different perspectives. So let's hope that we come up with good results in the end. And as has been said, the research project is still ongoing, and we will have, besides research, there will be art, these kind of, what would you call, Mia? Art, yeah. Yeah, participatory, art, these kind of workshops. But so due to Corona, they went as planned, but let's hope that they will be later. So stay tuned if you want to take part in those. And so I don't know anymore what I'm trying to say, so let's move to the questions if you have. Sorry. So we have 5 minutes for questions, I think.
Yes. Oh, well, oh. Thank you. So we have, as Heta said, 5 minutes for questions. So are there any eager? Yes, over there. Yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. I can imagine how rich and fruitful your cooperation has been. And I actually have no question, but I have a comment that the time when Seili belonged to Turku University, I think it was very important for all the persons who worked at the university, for teachers, researchers, and I have worked during 20 years at the Continuing Studies Unit, and I have had there many workshops with multidisciplinary professionals, and also one big international workshop. And all people has been so relaxed and inspired by the nature and all these things. So I think it was a very important period, and it's great that there is nowadays research like that. Thank you for, and all the best for future.
Thank you for your memories, and there could be a whole research project to study the memories of Turku University staff and students and their relationship with Seili. So maybe in the future.
Okay. Anyone else? I have a question. You know, the theme is water, and as I just made up a word, archipelagian, a person who has spent a lot of time in archipelago, I know how important fresh water is. So could you kind of like, and it can be speculation altogether, so just I would like to know about the freshwater reserves in Seili. And have you or anyone else from your research group studied about the fresh water and the meanings attached to salt water and fresh water in archipelago and especially in Seili?
Yeah, that would be a good thing to look into. Fresh water it's one of the questions we ask from the interviewees, and we are interested in that because it can be a problem. In the archive sources, there are some mentions about fresh water and about wells, for instance, and but a lot of information can be gathered from people's memories, and well, I don't remember all the things that I could tell you about those because there is what is it called, like a water cleaning system, I think in Seili, but I don't remember when it, if I now remember correctly. So maybe it's better that I won't tell you anything, but I can tell you that it's one of the questions we ask, and it's one of the things that we want to find information about. But at the moment, I can't remember the things.
Okay.
Do any
yes.
other members of the research group remember? Okay.
We have a question here, yes.
Thanks, yeah. I would like to know how you're thinking about, we talked very much about the history in the past at Seili now, but also reflecting a little bit on, yeah, well, also with the biology we looked at, Ilari talked about the long-term data and so on, but how are you bringing that to today, and you know how we look at nature at Seili today and how we safeguard that place? What can your research bring to that topic?
Yeah, like historical research or our research. Yeah, maybe like even more generally speaking, if oftentimes the present day ideas and perceptions, they can rely on ideas about the past. Sometimes these ideas can be false or partly false, or so there can be ideas that we have done things this way always, period, we don't have to change, or such as an example. So in that way it's important to know, for instance, how people thought about animals or different plants during different times in the previous times, because that can tell us it can also tell us how did we get to this point, what things needed to happen so that we are now here. And of course, like one big question we would like to answer is like, why are we in this biodiversity crisis situation? And maybe we can't like give, of course we probably can't give one answer, but we try to see all these kind of paths that led us to this situation, and we need to look into the past and get a more broader picture so that we can understand why we are here. And maybe also one thing that history can teach us is that we have always changed. Like the climate is always changing, or the environment in a way is always changing, so are we as a species. We have always changed, so our ideas and practices, they can, in the future, they can also change. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We can squeeze in one short question and answer. Yes, there is one. Okay, let's do this.
Thank you. My name is Ulrika Greger. I'm an art historian. Very interesting presentations. Though I'm asking you, you don't seem to include the built environment, the history of the buildings, the huge hospital, the impact on the nature they actually had, and also thinking about what materials did they use. The wooden church, perhaps the wood was from Seili, and also the stones used in the hospital. Some thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. We in our presentations we didn't include buildings, or I didn't mention buildings, but in a way they are also our sources. They tell about the practices of fishing, of agriculture, of animal husbandry. There are like visible sources about the past. So in a way we will use them as a source, and the present landscape with the meadows and fields, they can also tell about the past. And so it would be really interesting to use those. And you talked about the inmates and their relationship with the nature. That's one of the questions I try to look into, but that is quite difficult because of the nature of the sources. But I hope that I can find some traces, and there are some traces to be found. Letters, for instance, that the mental hospital patients wrote and say something about the nature of the Seili. But in this presentation, I wanted to tell that Seili wasn't just a place for leper patients or mental hospital patients. I wanted to show, in a way, the other side of the island, or highlight the other story, that they have always, in the 17th century, during the leper hospital, there were people with their families living their lives in harsh conditions, but still, in a way, like normal life, everyday life. So in the presentation, I focused on that, but the inmates and their relationship with nature is also like one of the questions, because in Seili there have been so many groups of people, different groups of people, but we try to find something from each group. Yeah, so really important question.
Excuse me.
When we start archaeological research, we always first refer to old maps, for example. So then we can follow how the buildings have moved place, and that's how we decide where we excavate. And we also use plant history, for example, old inventories and partly old archives as well. But about buildings that are there today, we also have a geologist in our group, and he has a little bit studied the stone material of the contemporary buildings. And then in archaeological point of view, we only can study the past buildings. So we little
get to know about the building history on the island as well, but not too much.
Yeah, wasn't it so that the geologist in our group saw that the stone stairs on the main building's front door, the stairs leading to the door, are Kakola granite. So they're not from the island. And if I remember correctly, the wood or the timber to build the church that still exists on the island, it came from outside of Seili, according to the archived sources.
Thank you. I have to say that Seili has been and still is truly an island of life. And I would like to ask you, the presenters who are still here, to come here, please. Short blackout, sorry. And should we give a warm round of applause to these wonderful scientists and artists? Yes?